At the beginning of this journey, you are invited to set aside the weight that may still rest on your shoulders and allow your breathing to take on a slower rhythm. In this gentle stillness, there is nothing that must be pursued and no step that needs to be rushed, because the story you are about to enter is not one that demands tension, but rather a landscape of time that moves quietly, like air drifting between trees. We begin in a space that is neither bright nor dark, a space offering you a moment to adjust your senses before entering a town that vanished twice, once because of something too small to see, yet too powerful to escape, and once again because of time working at its own unhurried pace. In this opening, you are simply asked to be present, to let every second pass without interruption while history arranges itself around you like a mist that does not obscure but accompanies. There is no need to understand everything fully, because much of what happened in the past can only be touched softly, never forced into sudden clarity. You will walk through silent layers that no longer hold human voices, yet still preserve the echoes of footsteps that once filled concrete streets now swallowed by roots and soil. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of time, a place where the modern world pauses for a moment and history sits beside you without offering answers. Here, the sensation that arises is not fear, but a quiet calm that gently wraps around your body like a thin blanket made of cold air. You may sense how the world slows as your attention begins to follow the flow that leads toward the town of Pripyat. A town once alive with laughter and daily routines, then suddenly frozen in a long night. Remembered by the world and kept within the earth. As you begin this slow journey, a small curiosity may form about what lies behind those abandoned buildings, or how time can erase a life and then erase it again without leaving a clear trace. But do not hurry. Allow the story to open itself gradually, because each part of this narrative is shaped like a path that curves softly, guiding you from one point to the next without pressure to grasp everything at once. In the end, you are simply asked to follow a calm, steady rhythm, to feel your presence in a space layered with history, yet still dreamlike in its slow descent toward dusk. In 1986, when the chill of early spring still lingered in the northern Ukrainian air, you stand as though at the edge of time, gazing upon the city of Pripyat, which then appeared young and full of confidence that the future would favor those who believed in order and progress. The city had been built with noble purpose, to create a comfortable living space for the workers of the nuclear power plant that was considered the pride of the Soviet Union. Yet, even on its calmest days, when children still ran along the sidewalks and radio announcements drifted lazily from balconies with a tone that seemed routine, there was a faint vibration unnoticed by anyone, like a quiet whisper slipping through window cracks, offering a subtle warning that something was stirring beneath the surface of the seemingly stable reality. You sense that shadow now when you look back at those days, as though time has peeled away the layers of optimism and left behind the fragile core that neither concrete nor propaganda could hide. Pripyat, once so alive, has become a space that exists only in memory, a city that retains the echoes of human routines, yet no longer has humans to continue them. Those days moved in orderly rhythm, yet something in the air felt slightly heavy, slightly too silent, even while filled with the sounds of life. you imagine the metallic scent of the railway tracks, the hurried footsteps of early morning workers rushing to the industrial buses, and the leaves swaying gently as if trying to deliver a message no one could decipher. Pripyat was a city born of belief and stability, yet it stood upon something that was not stable at all. When you gaze back through the corridors of time, you seem to notice tiny cracks that were once invisible. A mosaic of uncertainty slowly revealing itself. The city held many stories of pride, labor, and carefully woven dreams. Yet behind them all, you sense the presence of something older and quieter than any human ambition. A mysterious tension that waits in places considered safe, watching humanity with patience until its moment arrives. Pripyat, in that year, was a city standing tall, without knowing that within days it would transform. From a center of life into a silent space abandoned by human voices. As you recall it, you feel a faint, cold wind carrying the scent of the past, as though the city still breathes very slowly, yet continues to exist suspended between reality and memory. As you step deeper into the corridor of time that carries you back to that year, you sense how Pripyat's location was chosen not merely for its proximity to the nuclear reactor that promised the future of energy, but also because of its serene landscape surrounded by pine forests and a slow-moving river that seemed to be in no hurry at all. The city was built on the belief that nature could coexist with human ambition, a relationship that appeared harmonious from afar. Yet when you look closer, you can catch small signs that this balance was fragile, like dust suspended in the air. The Pripyat River flowing through the city carried the reflection of a constantly shifting sky. And you can imagine how the citizens once stood by its banks watching the water drift as though it promised eternal calm. Even so, that water also stood as a silent witness to something far larger preparing to emerge. You see the shadows of the trees growing densely, and between their tall trunks lies a subtle whisper you can feel but cannot trace. Perhaps it is merely an echo of the past, or perhaps it is something else, something hidden and far older than time itself. The location of Pripyat, which seems strategic, holds a gentle irony. For it is in places like this where humans feel safe to project their future, unaware that uncertainty watches from behind the roots of the trees. The city sat far enough from major crowds, yet close enough to scientific activity, that it created the impression that modern life could grow undisturbed. You can imagine the rows of towering apartment blocks whose shadows moved slowly across the sidewalks each time the sun crossed its highest arc. From a distance, everything looked stable and straight, like lines drawn by a confident hand. But you know the earth beneath them held secrets no one ever anticipated. As you stand within this landscape in your imagination, you feel the wind carrying the scent of damp soil, the sound of leaves brushing against each other, and an atmosphere so calm it creates the sensation that time itself is being held still so humans could savor that thin layer of peace. Then you realize that this location, with all its beauty and tranquility, would soon become witness to one of the most unsettling events in modern history. You sense something hanging in the air, something you cannot see but know is present, a sign that even the most peaceful places may contain mysteries waiting to awaken when humanity is too focused on chasing the future they believe they understand. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into the shadows of that year, you begin to sense how Pripyat stood as a city that had only just completed its youthful stage. The city had been officially established not long after the golden age of nuclear energy, and every corner reflected the optimism so characteristic of that era. You can imagine newcomers arriving with hopeful faces, bringing their families. Admiring the scent of new buildings still warm from the hands of construction workers. Streets built with orderly patterns gave the impression that the city was stitched together by hands devoted to the future. In your mind, you can see streetlights once glowing softly at night, illuminating sidewalks where children ran home laughing. Yet, in the quiet of your imagination, you can also feel how those lights eventually went dark without a proper farewell. Pripyat stood only 2 kilometers from the reactor that was hailed as a model of the future, as though that closeness symbolized humanity's triumph over old boundaries and its success in taming an invisible fire. But then you begin to understand the gentle irony that flowed like an unseen current beneath the city. The calm felt by its residents, the safety they built through routine, and their faith in technology were merely thin layers covering the reality that something greater was taking shape. You can sense how the city awoke each morning to the sound of birds and wind brushing through the trees, as though nature still acted as an old guardian, quietly observing. Each imagined step you take on its dusty roads reminds you that Pripyat was not just a workers' city, but a social experiment about how humans and technology coexist beneath one sky. Picture the tall apartment blocks that from afar looked like cubes of concrete, sheltering thousands who never imagined their time with the city would be so brief. You see living rooms once filled with the sound of television, dinner, laughter, and casual conversations about a future that felt certain. Yet you can also sense how every room now holds only directionless echoes. And though the city still stands firmly within the memory of history, you begin to realize that in the end, Pripyat would vanish not once, but twice. First, by the force that changed everything in seconds, and second, by the passage of time that slowly swallowed what remained of a once bright life. All of it begins to feel like a long prelude before the city truly disappears from the physical world and lives only as a shadow inhabiting the stories you hear in the stillness of night. As you step deeper into the layers of time that shape this city, you begin to feel how Pripyat was not merely a place for workers to live, but a symbol of an era convinced that progress could replace uncertainty. In its early years, the city was so full of life that every corner seemed to radiate an energy aligned with humanity. As grand vision of the future, you can imagine morning markets opening with the hurried footsteps of mothers carrying cloth bags, the aroma of warm bread rising from freshly fired ovens, and the gentle conversations about upcoming work shifts that became part of the soft music of daily existence. In this imagined scene, you can see the younger generation growing up with the belief that they were participating in a story being written by a rapidly changing world. Yet beneath all of this lay a delicate layer that had begun to fracture long before anyone noticed. The technology so deeply respected in this city carried with it a false calm that gradually blurred the population's ability to sense hidden risks. You can almost feel the city breathing in the same rhythm day after day, as though every life within it moved automatically. Such neatly arranged routines offered comfort, but also kept citizens from noticing the subtle signs around them. Perhaps you can imagine the wind sounding heavier on certain days, or faint glints of light appearing in the distance. Things the residents dismissed as normal functions of the machinery they trusted completely. Pripyat served as the public face of a world eager to believe that science could govern everything with precision. Yet you begin to understand that such tranquility was never entirely real. There were fine cracks creeping through the structure of this city long before the first warning sounded. These cracks were invisible, yet you can almost sense them as you walk among the buildings that now exist only in the memory of history. The longer you allow yourself to sink into the city's old life, the clearer it becomes that Pripyat held an omen that humanity could not decipher. The city became a stage where dreams and fears coexisted without ever recognizing each other. And as you stand imagining those final days before everything changed, you begin to feel how life in this city flowed so peacefully that no one realized their future was thinning like the last light of dusk, fading quietly. What seemed stable had already shifted, and what seemed safe had long been moving toward the silence that Pripyat never expected. As you step further into the deepening stream of time, the city begins to present itself differently, as though it wishes to reveal that what appears on the surface is only a small portion of the story. In the early 80s, Pripyat stood at the height of its confidence and stability. It rose as a monument of modernity, shining brightly among vast forests. A place where thousands entrusted their futures to technology they believed to be the safest in the world. If you imagine a morning from those years, you may see sunlight falling across neatly arranged apartment blocks, reflecting a soft glow on windows, still holding traces of morning dew. There was something soothing about such order, a pattern that guided daily life without loud interruptions or significant disturbances. Yet the thousands of footsteps that filled the city as sidewalks carried stories that no one fully knew. Each worker from the power plant brought home small, unspoken thoughts, lingering like minor concerns, too trivial to mention yet strong enough to leave faint traces in memory. You can imagine some of them noticing a vibration slightly off rhythm, or a room temperature that occasionally felt warmer without technical explanation. They recorded these things silently and forgot them under the pressure of routines that demanded precision. It was as if the city absorbed all those doubts and stored them someplace unseen, as though it understood that humans were not always prepared to face the shadows cast by reality. As you walk through these layers of recollection, you begin to understand that Pripyat was a place where everyone lived within patterns arranged so neatly that no room was left for other possibilities. You can picture scientists walking with nearly unshakable confidence, technicians synchronizing each step with instructions, and families believing their world was safe and orderly. All of this reflects how powerful the illusion of calmness had become. An illusion strong enough to turn itself into a false reality for thousands of lives. In the silence that now fills the city, you can sense how fragments of that life remain suspended in air that never completely left. It is as if the old walls are trying to remind you that before the accident, Pripyat was not only alive, but believed in itself wholeheartedly. That belief made the coming tragedy feel even deeper because no one imagined that something so stable could fall apart in an instant. And as you pause, you can feel how this entire story begins forming an image. One that slowly guides you toward the darker layers ahead while remaining wrapped in gentle calmness. As you continue walking through the deepening layers of this story, you may begin to sense a subtle shift that occurred in the city long before the night that changed everything. Pripyat did not live solely through its daily routines, but also through the belief that every part of the city had been designed to function with a precision that should never falter. In schools, students studied the structure of the atom, with enthusiasm reflecting the future they hoped to reach, while teachers explained the concept of energy as something clean and controlled. You can imagine classrooms filled with scientific posters, chalkboards covered in formulas, and wide windows allowing sunlight to calm the minds of those growing within an era of industrial optimism. Yet behind every lesson, there existed an incomplete understanding of the boundaries of the forces they were learning about. The city had never felt real danger, so safety became part of daily life, like the air they breathed without thought. If you walk through the city park in the afternoon, you might imagine people once sitting quietly on long benches that are now broken and covered in moss. They once talked about weekend plans, small accomplishments at work, or simply waited for children playing near the fountains. That atmosphere created a gentle harmony, as though the city had its own pulse flowing without interruption. Yet even in that calmness, there were signs that can only be recognized when viewed from the future. Technical reports noted minor fluctuations in a cooling system. Maintenance logs showed equipment being replaced sooner than planned. And brief conversations occurred in the plant corridors about warm spots appearing in machinery that should have stayed cold. None of these details seemed significant at the time because each could be explained within the operational tolerances they trusted. You can sense how the entire city moved in harmony between unawareness and certainty. Everyone lived their days in nearly identical rhythms, waking in the morning, going to work, resting briefly, then returning to their simple family routines. If you stood in the city square, then you would hear steady footsteps, soft conversations, and distant mechanical humming flowing gently through the air. All of it created the illusion that their lives would never shift from the path they were on. Yet the city was slowly accumulating layers that would eventually form part of a larger story they could not foresee. Like air moving without sound, the change was forming quietly. A thin thread weaving a new direction without offering any warning. And as you stand among these memories, you begin to understand that Pripyat did not fall because of one great mistake, but because of Kar. Thousands of tiny, overlooked details that came together at a point that could no longer be avoided. On a cold morning when thin mist still wraps the outskirts of the town, you walk along the streets of Pripyat that were once busy and now seem frozen in a frame of time. The sidewalks that used to hold hurried footsteps now collect faint traces, moss and seeds scattered in the seams of concrete as if nature slowly reclaims what humans borrowed. You see rows of apartment buildings, windows whose curtains once moved with the flow of family life, now staring empty and reflecting a sky that often changes color. In this imagined scene, you sense the presence of routines that once existed, the sound of bicycles passing, children laughing. Radio announcements on balconies, all held back as fragmented echoes in the air. When you stop, you might hear the whisper of wind through open corridors. And that sound feels like a small reminder that this town once lived with activity and order. In the corner of the now empty toy factory, you can picture rows of shelves once filled with color and movement. Dolls arranged neatly, waiting for small eyes to see them. Classrooms in the elementary school hold chalkboards marked with lessons in basic science, and small desks still bear crayon stains on their surfaces. These objects suggest that life here was not always grand or monumental, but made of ordinary moments, lived every day. You realize that Pripyat's loss is not only about empty buildings, but the collapse of routines that gave meaning to daily life. It is a subtle yet deep loss because it takes away habits that anchor people to the future. As you walk further, you see a playground whose metal swings are rusted, yet still show the form of their function that once invited laughter. You can imagine children running, jumping, and singing until night falls and streetlights guide them home. Now that scene remains as a mental image you call up to feel how the town once pulsed. The sensation is not frightening, but melancholic, because you understand how the most ordinary fragments of life become strong evidence of human presence. You are given the chance to observe the subtle shift between past activity and present emptiness, and that difference teaches you another way to read history, not only through major events, but through daily details that accumulate into a collective memory. As you walk closer to the area that once served as the cultural heart of the city, you see the theater standing with its broad walls and glass doors that once reflected the afternoon light. Now its surface is dull and cracked, yet the form of the building still holds the elegance that once made residents proud. You imagine people gathering here, wearing their best clothes on weekends to watch musical performances or school dramas. Applause once echoed from the inner walls that are now silent, and you sense a faint vibration of that past life lingering in the cold air. Along the entry corridor, faded posters cling to the walls, their colors muted and the papers swollen from moisture. Yet the faces of the actors in the images still show the energy that once brought the stage to life. You step through the spacious waiting hall with its marble floor, now covered in dust. Each of your steps lifts fine particles that swirl slowly in the light entering through window cracks. This hall was once a place of gathering, a space where people exchanged stories before the show began. You can imagine the gentle murmur of conversations filling the air, the boundary between reality and memory now softened by the quiet touch of the wind. You then enter the main performance hall. Rows of red seats stand like a regiment, no longer possessing the audience they once awaited. Some chairs tilt, others have collapsed in the back rows, yet they still maintain a formation that leads toward the stage. The stage itself feels like the heart of the city that has stopped beating. Heavy dark curtains hang with wrinkled folds, and the floor shows marks of dances and footsteps of performers who once entertained hundreds of eyes. You stand in the center of the hall, feeling an atmosphere not frightening, but full of weighted silence. It is not an empty silence, but one that stores many stories. You imagine how the spotlights once slowly turned on, creating warmth that filled the room, offering a small hope that the night would become part of cherished memory for those who attended. Now you are accompanied only by the echo of your own steps, gently bouncing against the aging structure. You realize that this building was more than a place of entertainment. It was where the residents of Pripyat felt simple togetherness and joy. The building stands as a marker of collective emotion and now remains a quiet witness to changes no one expected. When you close your eyes for a moment, you may hear faint sparks from the past trying to resurface. Not as a disturbance, but as a reminder that life once flowed warmly between these walls, now frozen in time. As you leave the theater and walk toward the northern section of the city, you enter an area that once consisted of small kiosks where residents purchased their daily necessities. The narrow path is now covered in moss, and tree roots grow through the cracks of what was once flat concrete. You sense the ground slowly reclaiming the traces of life that had once been active here. The kiosks stand fragile, yet still maintain their basic shape that hints at their role in connecting residents with everyday needs. Some wooden doors have collapsed, while the name boards have peeled away after harsh seasons. You imagine small queues forming here long ago where laughter and casual conversations were exchanged while waiting to buy bread or fresh milk. As you approach one of the larger kiosks, you see metal shelves still attached to the walls. They are rusted but not fallen, as if refusing to surrender to the passing years. A few small objects like bottle caps and pieces of paper remain scattered on the floor like fragments from the final day before everything had to be abandoned in haste. You imagine the owner closing the door on what seemed like an ordinary morning before the atmosphere shifted into something unimaginable. The room carries a faint scent of old metal and settled dust, creating an aroma not unpleasant, but holding the strong character of a long deserted space. You continue walking and pass a small bulletin board tilted to one side beside the path. It once displayed important information, city events, or lost item notices. Now it holds remnants of faded papers barely clinging to the surface, their colors almost gone like messages that can no longer be read. You touch the cold wooden frame and realize that this board once played a small yet meaningful role in the social life of the city. Beneath its worn condition, you can still feel the trace of human interaction that once kept this place alive. As you walk further, the soft rustle of leaves carried by the wind creates a rhythm that feels like it replaces the bustle of the past. The thin night breeze brings the sensation that the city does not mind sharing its secrets with you, as long as you move gently and listen without haste. You understand that although time has covered much with dust and moss, the basic structure of Pripyat, daily life remains etched in faint lines across the buildings. This realization helps you see that the city has never fully vanished. It waits for someone willing to observe it with patience and respect, as if every corner wishes to retell small memories that once made it breathe as part of the world. As you walk deeper into the northern area of the city, you arrive at a small intersection that once served as a gathering point for children and parents waiting for the school bus. Now, the intersection looks like an abandoned, empty space. Yet its former purpose can still be sensed from the slightly wider sidewalk and the different pattern of stones beneath your feet. You pause for a moment and let the wind carry the cool scent of the overgrown trees. In that quietness, you can almost imagine the morning conversations of parents and children before each continued on with their day. No sound remains, except the soft rustling of leaves gently replacing the past with a calmer rhythm. At the edge of the intersection stands a small building that once functioned as a public information post. Its walls are now coated in dull green moss, and its windows hardly reveal anything inside due to the thick layer of dust. If you step closer and look through the fogged glass, you can see a small table still in its place, although one of its legs appears broken. On top of the table lies an object shaped like a small metal box. Its color has faded, and the lid is slightly open, as if someone had touched it during the final days before the city was abandoned. You do not know what the box was used for, yet its presence gives the impression that even the simplest objects hold stories that were never truly concluded. You continue walking along a path, slowly overtaken by creeping roots that push through the concrete like delicate lines. They appear both strong and gentle, moving with a quiet and gradual purpose. You realize that nature did not reclaim this city with violence, but with long patience shaping every corner to fit its return. On the left side of the path, you notice a long, concrete bench cracked on the surface, yet still intact. It gives the impression of a place where someone may have once rested on a peaceful afternoon, enjoying fresh air before everything changed in an instant. When you place your hand on the surface of the bench, you feel a chill, not only from the air, but from the accumulated weight of time resting on old objects. You imagine someone once waiting for a friend here, or simply watching the street that was once filled with people passing by. Now the bench stands as part of a quiet landscape, accompanied only by trees and the shifting sky as the sun moves westward. As you rise and look around, you realize that the city is not frightening. Instead, it possesses a calmness that is difficult to describe, like a place that accepts its fate without protest. You feel as though the city invites you to keep walking, observing, and understanding that the emptiness you see is not only loss, but a new form of existence slowly forming from remnants of untouched history. As you move deeper into an area covered by thick trees, you come upon a small path nearly hidden beneath moss and fallen leaves. This path was once a side route used by residents heading toward a small marketplace that has now completely collapsed. You walk slowly across the slippery surface and feel how each step pulls you further into a space more isolated than the rest of the city. The air here is heavier with moisture, carrying the scent of wet soil mixed with the smell of old wood cracking under the pressure of time. You hear nothing except the gentle sound of branches brushing against each other as the wind moves through them in a slow rhythm. On the left side of the path stands an old street lamp, leaning but still upright. Its paint has peeled and the frame is rusted, yet the basic shape remains visible. As you look at it longer, you can imagine how the lamp once glowed with a soft yellow light guiding residents home on winter evenings. Its fragile form now reveals how long it has endured without human presence. You feel as though the lamp watches your steps, not as a lifeless object, but as a silent witness to the uninterrupted changes that continue around it. Not far from the lamp is a nearly fallen signpost. The writing on its surface is no longer clear because its paint has faded and is covered with moss. However, if you examine it closely, you can see faint lines that may have once pointed toward a school or community center that served as a hub of social life in the city. You imagine how residents followed those directions years ago, without ever expecting that the entire path they trusted would one day be swallowed by an endless quiet no one had predicted. As you move farther, you reach a small clearing overgrown with tall wild grass. At its center stands a low square building that resembles a storage shed. The door has fallen off its hinges and lies on the ground covered in thick moss. You peek through a crack in the wall and see empty shelves inside. There are no remaining objects except dust drifting slowly with the air. The interior gives the impression of a place abandoned in haste, yet without disorder. As if someone closed it for the last time, believing they would return. You stand for a moment, listening to the soft sound of grass brushing against itself. No living creature is visible, only the moving shadows of trees swaying like gentle waves. You feel that this place holds a different calmness from other parts of the city, as if untouched by chaos, but shaped solely by time. When you prepare to continue walking, you realize that each step leads you deeper into a city that is no longer merely lumped, empty, but filled with layers of memory waiting for someone patient enough to notice them. As you leave the small building and return to the narrow path covered in overgrown grass, you notice a subtle shift in the air surrounding your steps. The wind, once soft, now carries a slightly heavier tone, as though lifting small fragments of the past from the ground. You follow the trail, past a row of birch trees, whose white trunks rise like silent pillars guarding the edges of a city long asleep. Their thin leaves move slowly, creating a whispering sound that feels like a memory too distant to recall, yet too close to ignore. Ahead stands a larger structure, a two-level building that appears to have once served as a community service center. Its front door has collapsed and lies on the dirt floor covered in a thick layer of moss. You step carefully into the main hall, illuminated by sunlight entering through a large gap in the roof. The light forms irregular patterns across the concrete floor, scattered with small pieces of glass that reflect like dull crystals. There is a different atmosphere here, as though the building still tries to preserve the remnants of the life that once flowed through its walls. Along one wall hangs an old announcement board with a surface darkened by age. You approach and observe faint lines, likely remnants of colored paint that once displayed schedules or messages for the community. You imagine this hall once filled with friendly conversations as people gathered to share news. Now all those voices are gone, leaving only an echo waiting to be summoned back from a space that has become too quiet. You move toward the back of the building and find a narrow staircase still intact, though cracked on nearly every step. You decide to climb it slowly, feeling the gentle vibration of the aging structure beneath your weight. The upper floor contains a long corridor lined with doors all left open. Sunlight passes through broken windows, revealing dust that floats like tiny golden particles drifting with the movement of the air. Each step produces a soft sound that travels along the hallway, making you feel as though the space itself is trying to remember the rhythm of life it once held. In a small room at the far end of the corridor, you notice a simple wooden desk almost entirely decayed. On top of it lies a small cylindrical object partially buried beneath dust. When you move closer, you realize it is a desk lamp that may have once illuminated someone writing notes or work documents. You touch its surface and feel the cold metal that has not been touched by human hands in decades. This small room feels like a time capsule, preserving its stillness without losing the last trace of hope once left behind. Descending the stairs and stepping back outside, you sense that this building is more than an abandoned space. It is a vessel of memory, holding fragments of lives once intertwined. You continue forward into the sunlight that casts a golden hue across the leaves, guiding you toward the next part of Troyes, the city waiting to be uncovered. After returning to the main path covered by tree roots protruding like old veins along the ground, you walk slowly toward an area that appears more open. Sunlight slips through gaps between the branches, forming thin moving lines that sway along with the leaves. You sense that the atmosphere here differs from the parts of the city you explored earlier. The air feels warmer, and the scent of wild plants growing without restraint gives the impression that this place is hiding something. Behind its calm exterior, you continue walking until you see a wide field filled with knee-height grass swaying gently like a small sea stirred by a mild wind. On the right side of the field stands a large structure resembling an auditorium or community hall. Its outer walls are made of dull concrete, cracked in various places, though the overall shape still suggests it was once a center of important public activity. The main door is no longer attached, leaving only a rusted metal frame. As you approach, you feel cold air drifting out from the dark interior, indicating that the air inside the building moves more slowly, as if reluctant to meet the outside world. You step inside, and your eyes gradually adjust to the dimness. The room is wide, and rows of old seats remain in their original formation, though many are broken and missing their cushions. Thick dust covers every surface, and when a thin beam of sunlight enters through a hole in the roof, the floating particles look like a soft mist, trying to remember something from years long gone. You can imagine hundreds of people once sitting here listening to announcements, speeches, or small performances that colored daily life. Now the only sound is the gentle echo of your footsteps moving across the empty hall. On the small stage at the front of the room lies a long wooden table nearly split in half from decay. A small round object rests on it. It appears to be an old microphone, no longer connected to anything. Its cable is severed and lies curled at the edge of the platform. As you touch it gently, you feel the cold metal, which seems to hold the last traces of human voices once carried through it. The sensation is faint, yet heavy, as if something still wishes to speak, but no longer knows how. Behind the stage is a small door leading to the control room. You do not enter, but through the gap you see old electronic panels covered in dust and rust. The buttons are no longer clear, yet their arrangement remains recognizable. You imagine the operator who once sat there adjusting sound and lighting systems, perhaps proud of ensuring every event ran smoothly. Now only remnants remain shaped like their former purpose. When you step outside and return to the field, you feel a warmer breeze carrying the scent of wild grass. The place feels like a heart that once beat strongly, but now rests in a long, undisturbed sleep. You continue walking toward the next part of the city, waiting to be explored. After leaving the wide field and the silent auditorium structure behind, you follow a narrow path leading toward the southern edge of the city. The path is partially covered with dry leaves that have fallen over time, forming a thin layer of memories that never completely disappear. Each step produces a gentle sound that blends with the passing breeze, creating a calming rhythm that makes you feel as though time moves a little slower here. Tall trees line both sides of the path, their trunks covered in pale green moss that climbs to the branches as if trying to bind the entire place in a quiet, orderly stillness. Soon the path leads you to an area that appears more structured than the parts of the city you passed earlier. The remains of square foundations are scattered across the ground like outlines of buildings that no longer exist, yet still leave traces of their forms. You pause for a moment to study the patterns and realize that this may once have been a residential area inhabited by families who lived in the simple rhythm of daily life. Now, only short grass grows evenly across the empty spaces, as though trying to hide something that once carried voices and movement. Among the foundations lies a straight walkway leading to a small square building with a low roof. Its walls are made of faded stone covered in moss and fine cracks. As you approach, you sense that it may once have served as a storage house or a small administrative center. The front door remains closed, but the wood is brittle and peeling, revealing old split fibers weakened by time. When you touch it, the surface feels cold and fragile, like an object that has long lost its sense of purpose. You push the door gently and find an empty room without furniture. The earthen floor is even, and the inner walls still display a muted color that may once have felt warm to the people who used the space. In the corner lies a small pile of smooth stones, perhaps remnants of another part of the building or pieces that gradually fell from the walls. You imagine the people who once entered this room carrying records, tools, or simply performing tasks considered routine in their time. Now the room holds only faint echoes of activities that can no longer be identified. When you step back outside, the sky appears slightly different. The previously bright light has softened, as if trying to wrap the entire place in another layer of calm. The wind returns, carrying the scent of damp soil and slowly decaying leaves. You sense that this place invites anyone who passes through to pay closer attention, not necessarily to fully understand its history, but to feel the presence of something that once mattered to others, even if it is no longer visible. With quiet steps, you follow the next pathway toward the part of the city that remains unseen, still filled with curiosity about the stories left behind. The path you follow begins to slope gently downward, leading you toward a lower part of the city. The ground here is damp, and small traces of water run between the stones like the remnants of a stream that might once have been stronger before this place turned into a quiet, almost forgotten city. Each step creates small splashes in the shallow puddles, while the soft sound of flowing water fills the walks. Space between the trees with a faint tone that makes the atmosphere feel like the beginning of something waiting to be revealed. The air grows slightly cooler, carrying the scent of wet soil mixed with newly fallen leaves. Before long, you reach a long wall almost fully covered by climbing plants. The wall stretches along the slope as if marking a boundary that once separated this area from something considered important. As you move closer, the moss-covered surface displays irregular patterns that look almost deliberate, as though the plants themselves are redrawing fragments of lost history. Touching the wall gives you a cool, gentle sensation, making you aware of how long time has worked to merge this structure with the surrounding landscape. Following the wall further, you find a stone gate still standing despite parts of its frame having collapsed. It appears that the gate once served as an entrance to a specific section, perhaps a garden, a communal field, or a ritual space used by the people who once lived here. The stones are faded, and the fine cracks spread across them like lines on an ancient map. Walking through the gate, you sense the air becoming quieter, as though you have entered a place that holds something unwilling to be disturbed. Beyond the gate stretches a flat, open yard covered mostly with short grass. Small trees grow at regular intervals, as if still following a pattern once set by human hands. As you look closer, you notice several low, square stones embedded in the ground, forming a long line. These stones may once have formed part of a structure or boundary, though now they serve only as silent markers of something that has long since changed. On the eastern side of the yard lies the remains of a small round structure. Its low walls stand at half their original height, and the center is empty, with no clear indication of its former purpose. Yet the way the stones are arranged suggests that the place may have been used for gatherings or for storing something valuable to the past community. You try to imagine the soft voices that may once have filled the area of the footsteps that approached and drifted away, and the subtle activities now surviving only in speculation. As you walk toward the far end of the yard, the wind blows with a steadier tone, as if trying to show you which direction to follow next. Sunlight on the ground creates thin glimmers that move slowly, giving the impression that the space, though forgotten, still preserves its own quiet dignity. You continue your journey with curiosity growing, following the gradually clearer path toward the next part of the city waiting to be found. After leaving the wide yard, you find a narrow path that feels like a natural corridor formed between tightly spaced trees. Large roots break through the soil, forming irregular patterns that make you walk more carefully. The sound of leaves moved by the wind is clearer here, as if the corridor works like a funnel gathering every whisper of nature into one soft, continuous murmur. Sunlight enters only through small openings in the canopy, creating shifting patches of light on the ground, like shadows of time sliding forward. Along the way, you notice a small square building almost completely swallowed by vegetation. Its outer walls are made of faded bricks, some of which have collapsed, while thin roots slide like threads across their surface. The upper part of the structure is no longer visible, as it is wrapped by thick layers of creeping plants, forming a green cloak that seems woven slowly over decades. When you approach, you see a narrow doorway without a door leading to a dim interior. You step inside and pause for your eyes to adjust. The room is small, yet arranged with an echo of order despite its abandonment. At the center is a low wooden table nearly decayed. A layer of dust rests on its surface, shifting gently as you draw closer. On the table lie several sheets of paper, yellowed and broken in places. Whatever writing once covered them has faded, leaving only faint lines that are difficult to distinguish. Their mere presence suggests that this place once served as a space for recording or storing information that mattered. Small shelves line the walls, most of them empty. Only a few clay containers remain lying on their sides, as if someone placed them down in haste before leaving with the intention to return. You touch one and feel the cold, fragile ceramic surface. There is a sense that these objects once stored something valuable, yet now, remain only as forms stripped of their original purpose. The room radiates a deeper quiet than other places you have visited, as though it holds a core of memories that never found their conclusion. When you step outside again, the wind through the tree corridor brings a slight shift in temperature. Light filtering through the branches creates new shapes on the ground, as if welcoming you back to the path. You sense that the small room, though simple and nearly forgotten, adds weight to the impression that this city is not merely empty, but a layered mosaic of lives preserved in silence. You continue walking with a more focused feeling, as if the parts of the city are slowly connecting into a story beginning to reveal its shape. You continue walking along the corridor that now feels wider as the surrounding trees grow farther apart. Sunlight reaches the ground more freely, creating a slow warmth that spreads to the tips of your fingers. The air feels different here, carrying a faint mineral scent reminiscent of old concrete buildings once grand, but now weakened. By time, the path slopes gently downward, leading toward an open area that might once have served as a gathering space or main passage connecting several parts of the city. On the left side of the clearing stands a row of tall, rusted metal poles. They form a straight line, as if still maintaining their old formation, even though their original purpose has long disappeared. If observed closely, you can imagine that these poles once supported electrical lines or city lights that illuminated the nights of Pripyat residents. Now they stand quietly, like bones of a large structure whose body has vanished. Their slender silhouettes bear grooves and marks shaped by the slow passage of decay. Nearby is a long building with large square windows. Many of the windows are broken, while the remaining ones are coated with thick layers of dust. The structure appears to be a sports hall or training facility that once hosted children and families. As you approach, you hear a faint rustling sound created by wind pushing through the window gaps, producing a low rhythmic tone like the building breathing, in an attempt to remain present amid abandonment. The concrete floor is cracked in several places, and small plants grow through the openings, taking advantage of the emptiness left by humans. You step inside. The main hall is wide with a floor that once supported lively physical activity, but is now covered with scattered debris, moss, and long shifting shadows cast by the moving sun. You can imagine the sound of children running, the echo of laughter, and the sharp whistle of a coach guiding practice sessions. Now the room reflects only the soft echo of your own footsteps, as though the building remembers the patterns of past activity and tries to imitate them in a fading form. In one corner stands a tall steel shelf, leaning dangerously to one side. A few abandoned sports balls remain on it, deflated and faded almost to gray. You touch one and feel its rough, cracked surface. The contact conjures faint images of small hands that once played with it, of the life that filled this room, leaving no space for loneliness. Now all of it has transformed into memories wrapped in dust and prolonged silence. When you step outside again, the sun tilts lower, casting warmer light through the trees. The place reveals that a silent city is not only shaped by loss, but also by traces of life that persist beneath the quiet. You continue your path, slowly sensing how every corner of Pripyat calls for your attention, inviting you to explore the deeper layers of history etched into its structures. You continue walking along a path now scattered with small debris and stones lying in no discernible pattern. The air feels cooler here, under the shade of tall trees that are becoming sparse, yet still offer a strange sense of safety, as if you are not alone, even though no one is visible. On the right side stands a row of old buildings that once formed an apartment complex for nuclear plant workers. The walls are cracked, some windows shattered, yet the overall structure remains intact, as if resisting complete disappearance. You walk slowly along the moss-covered sidewalk, with wild plants climbing the walls. Each step releases the damp scent of soil, mixed with the smell of wood and concrete slowly succumbing to age. In front of one building lies a playground now overrun by tall grass and small trees growing among rusty swings. You can imagine children laughing and pushing their swings. Yet now, the place echoes only the wind passing through the metal chains, giving the illusion that life lingers slowly fading. The swings sway slightly as the breeze passes through gaps in the trees, creating a sense that the city is still inhabited by memories of life. Nearby, a metal slide appears dull and covered with moss, as if waiting for a touch that will never come. As you walk further, the sidewalk slopes down toward a small square that once served as a gathering place for residents. The ground is uneven, and several paving stones have shifted due to tree roots growing beneath. In the center of the square stands a dry fountain with cracked concrete and moss covering parts of its surface. You pause to look at it, imagining water once splashing and children playing around it. Now only the shadows of the trees dance in the basin, as if the water has been replaced by a soothing silence. Surrounding the square, empty buildings remain standing. The walls and roofs show signs of decay. You can feel the aura of a city once alive, yet now frozen in quiet. Each window reflects sunlight differently, sometimes dim, sometimes shimmering, creating a play of shadows that makes the structures seem to breathe slowly. You walk carefully, realizing that this city is not merely empty, but layered with memories waiting to be felt by those patient enough to hear the whispers of its walls. As you leave the square, the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, and you realize that every step you take brings you deeper into the story of a vanished city. A city that, though abandoned, continues to hold the pulse of life embedded in every remaining surface and crevice. After passing through the tightly sealed doorway, you enter a part of the building that feels far quieter, because this area is no longer connected to the active ventilation system that operated in its early years. The room sits lower than the previous corridor, causing the air inside to feel heavier, as if it collects remnants of movement that once drifted through the upper spaces. Natural light barely reaches this space, leaving only a faint reflection from a small gap at the far end. The reflection moves with an unpredictable rhythm, sometimes lengthening, sometimes shortening, as if following the breath of a building no longer alive, yet still carrying mechanical echoes along its walls. The floor is covered with small fragments resembling shattered glass, yet upon closer inspection, the surface is opaque and coarse-like material formed from a mixture of sand, dust, and heat reaching high temperatures. The fragments are evenly scattered, as if they fell from a point no longer visible. When you step on them, there is no cracking sound because the material is too old and fragile for pressure to break it. Instead, reducing it to finer particles carried by the subtle currents of air in the room. Many technicians describe this area as holding faint traces of an emergency cooling process that failed completely, leaving hardened remnants in unexpected shapes. On the right side of the room stands a row of metal shelves, almost entirely warped from exposure to heat rising from underground. These shelves once held measuring instruments and technical equipment, but now remain as empty frames forming abstract lines, curving in the same direction. No recognizable objects survive on the shelves because most smaller metal parts melted and fused with the shelves when heat from the reactors spread through the now defunct ventilation and piping. If you touch the shelves, you feel a thin, flaky texture easily peeling away, a sign that the metal lost its strength on the long night the building endured. At the center of the room lies a large depression in the floor, resembling a heavy imprint pressed upward from below. The depression is asymmetrical, with contours that defy conventional technical explanation. Researchers suggest it formed due to a combination of rapidly rising heat and pressure unable to escape through official ventilation channels, forcing the floor to bear the load from below. There is no definitive proof, yet the shape gives the impression that something once moved slowly within the structure, stopping beneath this point before subsiding. Many who stand at the edge of the depression sense a subtle vibration indistinguishable from the pulse of the air. This space offers no answers, but creates an atmosphere that helps you understand that this part of the building experience changes that do not follow ordinary patterns of damage. Every surface, particle, and shadow in the room holds fragments of energy that once moved too powerfully to be perceived by the human eye. When you leave the room, you realize that the deeper you go into the building, the more layers of time fold and remain stored in forms no longer easily explained. You continue along a narrow corridor surrounded by cracked and dull concrete walls. The air here feels colder and more humid, carrying a faint scent of old metal. The low ceiling creates a sensation as if the space is gently pressing on your body, making each movement more conscious and each step heavier. On the right side of the corridor, old pipes cling to the wall, some rusted and leaking, releasing slow drops of water that form wet trails on the floor. You notice the rhythm of the drops, slow yet consistent, as if time itself moves more slowly in this place. Along the corridor, metal doors hang partly detached from their hinges, leaning or creaking as you touch them. Each door conveys a different sensation. Some feel heavy and solid, as if holding secrets from the past, while others are decayed and fragile, signaling long abandonment. You stop at one half-open door and peek inside to see a small room that might have served as a storage area for technical equipment. Empty metal shelves stand upright, yet thick dust covers their surfaces and fine particles drift with even the slightest movement of air. The silence in this room merges with your presence, giving the impression that every corner still holds echoes of past activity slowly fading away. In the middle of the corridor, the concrete floor rises slightly, forming a subtle, asymmetrical depression. The texture here differs from the surrounding floor, rough and wrinkled as if holding pressure once released from below. Many technicians describe this area as a point where old energy is still perceptible. a space retaining traces of forces that once moved too powerfully for an ordinary building. You stand briefly on the depression, feeling a faint pull on your feet. Something inexplicable, yet making you aware that this building has its own character, responding to the presence of anyone who passes through. At the end of the corridor is a tall, cracked window, allowing the afternoon light to spill in. The beam forms thin lines across the floor and walls, illuminating dust and fragments slowly lifted by air movement. The light casts shadows that move gently with the sun, giving the impression that the building is still alive, though only in a very subtle way. You watch the shadows for a moment, sensing that every particle of dust, every crack in the wall, and every old object around has its own story waiting to be discovered by someone patient enough to notice. As you leave this corridor and step into the next area, you carry the feeling that this building is more than just old concrete and metal. It is an archive of the past, holding layers of memory in every texture, light, and shadow. You realize that this journey is not just a physical exploration, but also a passage through time preserved. In every corner of Pripyat, a city that vanished yet continues to keep traces of its life, even under a blanket of silence. After leaving the narrow corridor, you enter a small courtyard surrounded by old buildings that once served as offices and administrative spaces. Tall wild grass covers parts of the pathway, creating moving patterns as the wind blows gently. The air carries a damp scent mixed with the aroma of old concrete and rusted metal, evoking a sense of time held in place. You walk slowly among the ruins, observing every detail of the walls and shattered windows. Cracks in the concrete resemble a map telling the story of pressure and vibrations that once flowed through these structures. On the right side of the courtyard, an emergency staircase clings to the wall of one building. It is rusted and some steps are missing, yet its form is still recognizable as a route leading to the upper floors. You imagine workers and staff once traversing these stairs daily, their steps light and rhythmic, following their routine tasks. Now the staircase is silent, leaving only the echo of footsteps that no longer exist. Every step you take near it causes small fragments to fall and shift, as if the building interacts with your presence slowly and cautiously. In the center of the courtyard, there is an old well, partially covered by a rotting wooden board. You approach and study the cracked texture of the wood, noticing moss growing in the gaps. The well gives the impression of being a former hub of activity, a source of water once used for daily needs, now transformed into a symbol of calm and delayed time. The wind passing through the well creates a soft sigh that blends with the sound of leaves and branches, producing a gentle rhythm, inviting you to pause and reflect. On the left side of the courtyard, remnants of old vehicles lie in a corner. Some are almost entirely gone, leaving only rusted metal frames. The remaining tires are flat, and the metal surfaces rough with corrosion. Yet you can imagine their original forms once used by workers and residents. Observing these vehicles reminds you of routines that once existed, travel from building to building, human interactions now vanished. The silence around underscores that time here has stopped. Yet details like these vehicles still speak of life that once existed. As you slowly step out of this courtyard onto the next pathway, you carry the feeling that every space in Pripyat preserves stories of existence now gone, yet still perceptible through textures, forms, and lingering scents. The city arranges its memories in layers that can only be felt with patience, where each step offers the opportunity to understand the silent rhythm still alive among the ruins. Continuing your journey, the pathway narrows further, surrounded by dense shrubs and trees forming a natural canopy overhead. Sunlight filters through the leaves in thin streaks that move slowly with the wind. The air feels cool, yet slightly humid, carrying the scent of earth mingled with old, decaying wood. You step slowly, observing how the roots protrude from the soil, as if reminding you that nature is gradually reclaiming the area once dominated by humans. On the right side of the path lie the ruins of a building that may once have been a shop or small office. Its walls have partially collapsed, revealing brick frames covered in dust. The windows are broken, and the remaining glass is cloudy with dust and moss on the surface. You notice every crack and broken brick, as though the structure still holds traces of the hands that built it. On the floor, now covered with leaves and debris, small metal objects are half buried. Their shapes are difficult to identify, but add the sense that this place was once full of human activity now lost. On the left side stands an old, leaning power pole. Its cables hang loosely, and some are severed. You imagine nights when this pole lit the path that is now silent. The pole stands quietly among the trees, serving as a silent witness to the slow yet inevitable change as the city is gradually enveloped by stillness and nature reclaims its space. A few meters ahead, you find a park bench overturned among tall grass. Its wood is cracked and metal rusted, yet its form remains recognizable. You can picture residents sitting here talking or simply enjoying a brief moment outdoors. Now the bench is still accompanied by the whispers of wind and rustling leaves, as if holding stories no longer heard. Midway through the path, an old well appears on the side. Its wooden cover is partially detached and moss grows around it. You bend down to observe the cracked wood texture while imagining the activities that once took place here. How water drawn from this well once served daily life. The well is now silent, only casting shadows of its lost function, yet it adds to the depth of history perceptible in every step. As you walk further away from this area, you realize that every tree, stone, and ruin holds a different layer of time. The pathway guides you not only physically through the city, but also through fragments of memory lingering in the air and soil. Pripyat remains alive in silence, inviting you to slow your steps and truly feel the presence of the past embedded in every remaining surface. You continue walking and find the pathway widening slightly, overgrown with tall wild grass almost covering the ground surface. Sunlight filters through the trees, forming moving patterns that dance slowly among green and brown shadows. The air feels warm yet fresh, carrying a mixture of wet soil and decaying leaves. Every step you take sounds softer as the leaf-covered ground absorbs the sound of your feet. The atmosphere seems to invite you to slow down and truly observe the surroundings. On the right, you see the ruins of a building that may once have been a library or community learning center. Most of its walls have collapsed, and the remaining windows are clouded with dust and moss. The wooden shelves left behind are decayed, and some books remain damaged from moisture and time. You bend down and notice pages of a book lying open on the ground, faded in color and fragile. You imagine children or teenagers once studying here, opening books, discussing stories, or writing small notes in the corners of the pages. Now there is only silence and dust drifting slowly as the wind moves through the empty space. On the left side of the path stands a street lamp, still upright, though leaning and rusted. You observe how the metal bends and its paint peels away. The shadows of the pole and trees dance on the ground as sunlight slowly shifts, creating patterns that change with the passage of the day. The street lamp stands as a silent witness to the nights of Pripyat once illuminated by its soft yellow light. Nights now only imaginable in the lingering memory carried by air and earth. A few meters ahead, you come across a small courtyard that may once have been a playground. The concrete ground is cracked and overgrown with wild grass. A wooden swing hangs stiffly from its chains, and a rusted metal slide stands like a silent sculpture in the middle of the yard. You sense the stillness around this place, as if time stopped when the children last played here. The wind moves gently, brushing leaves and branches, producing a faint sound that mimics the laughter that once echoed in the area. As you leave the courtyard, you realize that every corner of the city holds its own story through building ruins, abandoned objects, and the patterns of shadow and light shaped by nature. The pathway leads you deeper into Pripyat, inviting you to slow your steps. Feel the texture of the ground, the sound of the air, and the memories still attached to every fragment of this forgotten city. The city remains alive in silence, teaching patience and calm to anyone present enough to experience it. As you walk further, the path transforms into cracked concrete, overgrown with thick moss in several areas. The pattern of cracks forms random lines that seem to guide your gaze toward the distant ruins ahead. The air here feels cooler and drier than the previous area, carrying the scent of old dust and rusted metal. You notice how the change in texture of the ground and air gives a distinct sensation with each step. As if the city has its own language, perceptible only to those patient enough to observe it. On your right stands a two-story building with most of its outer walls collapsed. The remaining broken window glass hangs from its frames, and the remaining concrete walls bear long grooves telling the story of time and weather pressure. The structure appears to have once been an office or a small administrative center. Spaces once filled with human activity now leave only empty rooms and long shadows moving with the sunlight. You observe how trees growing nearby slowly invade the structure, roots and branches penetrating open gaps as if attempting to reclaim the space abandoned by humans. In front of the building, scattered metal and wooden debris lie, resembling remnants of destroyed furniture. You step carefully over the debris, feeling sharp and rough textures underfoot. The passing wind carries faint sounds of metal scraping slowly together, as if the city still breathes despite the absence of human activity. When you glance at the building, your shadow stretches across the walls, blending with the ruinous shadows, creating the illusion that the city continues to interact with each visitor present. A few meters to the side lies a small courtyard overgrown with grass and climbing plants. In the center stands a solitary small tree with leaves gently moving in the breeze. The tree appears to be a silent keeper of time, holding memories from the days when this courtyard was alive with activity. You bend down to observe the cracked earth around its roots, realizing how nature and time are gradually transforming this city into a different landscape while maintaining its own story. As you continue through the courtyard, you sense a combination of stillness and movement. Each step leads you deeper into a city that is not only abandoned but also alive through subtle forms of nature entering human spaces. You realize that every corner, ruin, and shaft of light carries its own story, interacting with your senses, teaching that Pripyat is not merely a dead city, but one that speaks the language of time and patience to anyone present enough to listen. As you leave the courtyard and enter a narrow path strewn with small debris and pieces of concrete, you feel the atmosphere grow quieter, as if every step you take is being observed by the city itself. The uneven surface requires careful steps, and every crack or break in the ground seems to tell its own story of pressure, heat, and changes that once occurred here. The air carries a mixture of wet earth and rusted metal scents, reminding you that even in silence, traces of humans and machinery linger in every corner. On the left side of the path stands a low building that may have once served as a shop or kiosk. Its walls are partially collapsed and partially covered in moss and climbing plants, slowly reclaiming the original structure. You notice the nearly broken door and shattered windows, through which empty wooden shelves are visible, perhaps once stocked with daily goods. As light enters, dust moves gently in the air currents, as if the room still waits for someone to bring it back to life, knowing it is impossible. A few steps further take you to a small square surrounded by single-story buildings with partially collapsed roofs. In the center lie remnants of broken furniture, scattered pieces of wood and metal. The wind carries faint, soft scraping sounds as metal fragments meet, creating a rhythm almost like the breath of the city. You observe how shadows from buildings and ruins blend with the afternoon sunlight, forming patterns that slowly change with the movement of the sky. At the far end of the square, a concrete staircase leads to the upper floor of a building that may have once served as an administrative center or a small office. The stairs are cracked and partially covered in moss, but remain passable with care. As you ascend, you feel subtle vibrations from the floor below, perhaps from the structure still holding remnants of energy from the past. Each step feels like walking through layers of history, where every surface, every texture carries memories stored in the walls and floors. Upstairs, you stand in a narrow corridor with a large window on one side. Sunlight entering through the window reflects on dust particles in the air, creating a calm atmosphere infused with the presence of the past. You see the remains of desks and chairs once used by workers, now coated in dust and left alone by time. Every step on the old wooden floor produces a soft sound, as if the building interacts subtly with your presence, reminding you that although humans have gone, the city remains alive through the traces they left behind. Continuing your journey from the quiet corridor, you enter a space that feels more expansive and open, even though light enters only through a few broken windows. The floor is covered with dust and scattered shards of glass resembling fragments of memories broken apart and the scent of old wood mixed with rusted metal fills the air. You can sense a pause in time here, as if the air moves slower and every movement sounds sharper than usual. This building may once have served as a meeting hall or community space where residents gathered for meetings or social activities. Yet now, only shadows of former life remain. On the right side, a long metal shelf stands, leaning to one side. Dust clings thickly to the metal surface, covering cracks and grooves formed by heat and pressure over the years. As sunlight passes through the window, the shelf shadow stretches across the floor, forming abstract patterns that change with the movement of the sun. In the center of the room, the concrete floor is cracked and undulating in some areas. You can feel the difference in texture as you step slowly, each footfall providing a distinct sensation between the fragile and the sturdy sections. Small plants grow through the cracks, taking advantage of the imperfections left by humans. You can imagine children or residents walking here, interacting with objects that now remain only as physical traces of long-gone activity. On the back wall, there is a large board that may once have been used for announcements or schedules. Its paint has faded, and parts of the surface are cracked or peeling, yet its shape is still recognizable enough to imagine its function. The light falling on the board produces a gentle contrast, highlighting every groove and imperfection. You sense a silence that comes not just from the absence of sound, but from the room's inability to move or respond. Standing for a moment in the center of this space, you realize that every element of the building carries its own story. From the cracks in the floor to the stretching shadows, from the dust clinging to surfaces to the broken windows, everything merges into a calm yet powerful visual and sensory narrative. You feel that this silent city is not merely an empty place, but a space that continues to hold memories, energy, and traces of human activity. As you leave this room and step back into the next corridor, you carry with you a gentle sense of presence, as if the city speaks without words to anyone willing to listen. You continue along a narrow corridor surrounded by aging concrete and steel ruins, following paths once traveled by workers and residents. Sunlight slips through gaps in the collapsed roof, creating thin lines that move slowly across the dusty floor. The air feels cooler here, yet carries the scent of dust, rusted metal, and decaying wood, as if hinting at the long life of this building. Each step produces a soft echo, bouncing between the walls as though the space wishes to remind you of the activity that once took place here. On your right, a row of large windows stands partially broken, yet the remaining glass reflects dim light. You can see shadows of swaying trees outside, and when the wind enters, it produces a soft whisper that follows the light. The surrounding walls are cracked and covered with dust, yet their outlines still reveal the architectural design meant to maximize light and air circulation. You notice how each gap and crack forms new patterns, narrating the history of a building slowly fading from human memory. In the center of the corridor lies a ruined workbench, remnants of wooden planks, and some rusted metal tools. You bend down to observe how dust has coated the surfaces, forming a thin layer that seems like time itself. You imagine the hands that once held these tools, working with focus and steady rhythm, bringing life into simple yet meaningful activity. Now all that remains are physical traces that can only be observed and felt by anyone patient enough to notice them. You move further into a darker space where light barely reaches the floor. A few old chairs remain arranged even though the fabric is torn and the padding hardened. The dust-covered floor and scattered fragments indicate that this room was once lively, yet now everything rests in stillness. You can imagine conversations, laughter, and footsteps echoing long ago, all gone, leaving only memories attached to every surface. Standing for a moment in the center, you feel a different kind of silence, not emptiness, but as if the city holds its own breath. Every wall, window, and floor carries layers of time accumulated over years, filling the space with stories unheard yet present. You continue your steps out of the corridor with a sense that this silent city is not only about destruction, but also about memories that continue to live, preserved in every crack and shadow you pass. You walk along a now wider path, with trees growing farther apart and sunlight reaching the ground more freely. The air feels lighter here, yet still carries the distinctive scent of old buildings and damp earth, creating a sensation of both nostalgia and quiet. Along the path, you notice remnants of cracked pavement, partially covered by moss and wild plants growing without control. Each step produces a soft sound as your feet touch the broken surface. Yet the echo does not disturb, instead adding to the calm rhythm of your walk. On the right side, a row of tall trees stands like silent guardians, their roots protruding from the ground like old veins forming intricate patterns. You observe how their shadows slowly move with the light, creating a visual guide for your steps. Beyond the trees, buildings in partial ruin are visible. Some roofs collapsed and walls cracked, yet their basic forms remain recognizable. Each structure has a unique character telling the history of the functions and activities that once occurred within. You come across a small park that likely served as a playground for children. Now, the remaining swings sway gently in the breeze, chains of rusted metal producing faint, repeating sounds that are oddly soothing. Wild grass covers most of the ground and scattered wildflowers add soft colors among the greenery. You imagine the laughter and play that once filled the space. Sounds now perceptible only through shadows and the blowing wind. In the center of the park sits a wooden bench, cracked but standing. You sit for a moment, feeling the rough texture of the wood in your hands while your gaze wanders around the area. The space radiates a calmness distinct from the rest of the city. A place that seems to preserve traces of life unwilling to completely vanish. You notice how sunlight passes through the branches, forming patterns that slowly shift with time, creating an almost hypnotic observational experience. As you continue your walk, you realize that every part of this path, each bench, swing, and tree, holds a small story of the people who once lived here. This city is not merely physical ruins, but a collection of memories preserved in forms that can be observed and felt. One has the patience to notice every detail. You walk slowly with the awareness that Pripyat is not just a lost city, but a space of time waiting to be rediscovered by visitors who approach it with respect and calm. You leave the park and step onto a narrower street flanked by apartment buildings that were once densely populated. Their walls are cracked and most windows broken. Yet the shadow of the structures still conveys a sense of order, even if only as remnants of architecture. The air between the buildings feels cooler, and the scent of metal and old concrete fills each breath, creating a tangible sense of a city abandoned by its inhabitants. You notice the remnants of fire escape stairs attached to the exterior walls, paint peeling and metal rusting, yet their form remains recognizable, a reminder of the human activity that once existed. Along the street, wild plants begin to cover the lower parts of buildings and sidewalks. Their roots creep into cracks in the concrete, breaking the surface slowly but surely. You look down and see moss clinging to every crevice, its green hue contrasting with the dull gray of the concrete. Each step feels like a journey through time where traces of human life blend with nature, gradually reclaiming the space. You hear the wind passing through gaps in the buildings, producing soft echoes that seem to voice stories from the past. Not far ahead, you find a small playground that was once full of children. Swings and seesaws are rusted, but still standing, though some have tilted or fallen. The wooden and metal surfaces feel cold and rough to the touch. You imagine the laughter that once filled this space, the small footsteps and cheerful shouts now preserved only in shadows dancing beneath sunlight filtering through trees. This place illustrates the stark contrast between life that once existed and the silence now prevailing. At the end of the street, an open field appears that was once used for community gatherings or sports activities. The concrete ground is cracked and portions are overtaken by tall wild grass. You walk slowly across the fractured surface, feeling an uneven balance with each step. A gentle breeze carries the scent of earth and metal, adding another dimension to the observational experience. In the center of the field, the remains of a flagpole stand upright. Though its metal and paint are faded, a silent symbol of a history once lively and now only faintly visible. As you continue walking, you realize that every detail in the city speaks in a quiet language. Cracks, dust, grass, shadows, all hold stories waiting to be observed. You understand that Pripyat is not merely a dead city, but a living archive preserved in physical form, ready to reveal its history to those patient enough to listen. This street leads you deeper into layers of history wrapping the city, teaching patience, attentiveness, and careful observation of the traces of human life left behind. You step into a higher area than the previous streets where buildings become more sparse and trees slowly dominate the empty spaces. Your footsteps now sound more distinct, echoing among cracked concrete walls and scattered debris. The air here feels fresher, mingling with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, giving the sensation that nature is gradually reclaiming the traces of humans who once lived nearby. You notice that in every corner, every crack, and every shadow, there are layers of history waiting to be explored with careful attention. On your left lies a former small garden, now filled with wild shrubs and tall grass. The small statues that once adorned this area have mostly collapsed, leaving only foundations and fragments that remain recognizable. You pause to examine these fragments, imagining the hands that once sculpted and maintained them. This awareness brings the realization that every object, no matter how small, holds a story connected to the lives of people who once inhabited this city. Walking along a leaf-covered path, you come across a small building that may have served as a library or community learning center. Its door hangs crooked, and window glass is broken. Yet, through its gaps, you can see wooden shelves still standing, despite the dust covering every surface. You imagine children and teenagers coming here to read and study. Books once neatly arranged, and the echo of their footsteps filling the now silent room. This place holds memories that are inaudible, yet remain alive in the physical remnants left behind. At the back of the building is a small courtyard surrounded by a low iron fence. Wild grass grows through the gaps, and several small trees have sprouted in the center, indicating that nature is gradually reclaiming the space. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, you feel the damp soil beneath your feet and realize that although humans have departed, this space still serves as a meeting point for nature and history. A gentle breeze carries the scent of wet earth and old leaves, as if whispering old stories preserved in every layer of soil and structure. As you step away from this area, you sense that your journey into the city's mysterious layers has just entered a deeper phase. Every structure, shadow, and ruin holds the lingering energy of life that once existed. And the surrounding silence guides you to observe more closely, listen more attentively, and feel more profoundly. Pripyat is no longer merely a dead city, but a living archive speaking through its physical forms and the atmosphere enveloping every corner. As you move further, you arrive at an area that once served as a small trade center on the outskirts of the city. Low buildings line both sides of a narrow street, now covered in rubble and wild shrubs. You can see remnants of foundations and walls still standing, though most roofs have collapsed, revealing wooden and metal frames that are beginning to rust. The air here feels warmer compared to the previous corridors, carrying the scent of earth mixed with fine dust from eroded concrete. Every step you take produces a soft echo, bouncing between the empty buildings as if the city is attempting to tell its story without words. On the right side of the street, you notice the remains of a wooden kiosk that once sold daily necessities. The remaining wood is cracked and covered in moss, yet its basic shape is still recognizable, reminding you of past activity. You imagine merchants arranging their goods carefully every morning. The voices of people coming to shop and the smell of food that may once have filled the air between the kiosks. Now the place is only filled with the wind moving through the cracks in the wood and brushing leaves, producing a gentle sound that seems to mimic the life that once existed. On the left, a small building appears to have been a post office or administrative center. Most doors and windows are gone, yet the remaining shelves and scattered documents suggest that people once busily managed daily affairs here. You lower your gaze to examine the remaining notes, although most have faded under the effects of time and weather. Each fragment gives the sense that humans were present with purpose, discipline, and routine, now lingering only as faint shadows. As you continue, the street begins to slope gently upward toward a small hill at the end of the trading area. From this height, you can view the panorama of the city, largely reclaimed by nature. Tall trees cover the empty buildings, and a small river that once flowed through the city is now nearly hidden beneath vegetation. The elevated perspective provides a new understanding that every corner of the city holds its own story, preserved in the ruins, the soil, and the softly moving air. At the top of the hill, you pause and close your eyes, letting the sensations of air, sound, and shadows penetrate your awareness. You sense that although humans have departed, traces of their lives remain, embedded in the physical structures and atmosphere enveloping each area. Pripyat is no longer merely a dead city, but a living archive of collective memory speaking through the silence, cracks, and ruins that continue to move through time. You slowly descend the hill toward an area that appears to have once been a small city park. Here, tall, wild grass covers most of the formerly neat cobblestone pathways. A few large trees stand scattered, their branches reaching outward, forming a canopy that filters sunlight and creates slowly moving patterns of shadow on the ground. The air feels cooler under the shade, carrying the scent of damp leaves reminiscent of springs no longer experienced by humans in the city. You walk carefully, feeling how the soft earth absorbs each step, making your movements feel intimately connected with the surrounding environment. In the center of the park, remnants of a playground remain, once filled with children's laughter. A swing still hangs, creaking gently as the wind nudges it, its paint faded to indistinct colors. You can imagine children running, shouting, and laughing here, unaware that one day this place would fall into eternal silence. A rusted metal slide appears like a path descending from the past into the present emptiness, while a fragile seesaw rocks slowly, indicating that though vacant, the forms still respond to the wind. At the edge of the park, you find old benches covered in moss and dust. Their tilted and cracked positions make you imagine people sitting there enjoying the evening, reading books or conversing quietly with friends and family. Now the benches remain still, awaiting interactions that will never come. As you approach, fine dust, lifted by a gentle breeze, settles on your hands, giving the sensation of touching time gone by, a subtle bridge between the present and lost memories. In another corner of the park, a small fountain lies dry, thickly covered in moss. Its formerly symmetrical structure now lies in disarray, stones cracked and some missing. Yet you can still discern decorative patterns that reveal the artistic care once devoted to its details. You imagine the sound of flowing water, cheerful and soothing, creating a gentle rhythm accompanying the children's play and the activity of nearby residents. Now, only the wind and brushing leaves replace the echo of water. Yet they still evoke the same sense of calm, as if the city wishes to remind you that life once existed here. As you leave the park, your steps slow, your heart held by an awareness of the fragility of the city that once thrived. Every element, grass, trees, benches, and remnants of the playground conveys that although humans have gone, the essence of their lives remains in the physical traces and the atmosphere surrounding you. You realize your journey is not merely across physical spaces, but a traversal through layers of memory preserved in every corner of this now silent city. Continuing your journey, you enter a street that once served as a main route to the city center. The asphalt that once covered the ground is now cracked and overgrown with moss and wild plants creeping along the edges of the sidewalks. Rows of buildings lining the street display traces of human activity now frozen in time. Small shops that once bustled with life now only remain as frames and broken windows. You walk slowly through narrow alleys between buildings, listening to how your footsteps echo softly across cracked concrete, absorbing sound and creating an atmosphere quieter than expected. On the left side of the street, you see a kiosk with most of its roof collapsed. The shelves inside are empty, the paint faded and covered in dust. You imagine how this kiosk once sold daily necessities, perhaps fresh bread, vegetables, or small items used by residents every day. Now only the remnants of the structure and the scent of decayed would accompany you as you approach. The sensation evokes a different kind of silence, not mere emptiness, but a preserved sense of life that once flowed between walls, now silent. Nearby, the kiosk stands a small park with a cracked statue covered in moss. The statue once depicted a local hero. Now only a shadow of its form remains recognizable. You stand beside it for a moment, sensing the presence of history trapped within this lifeless object. A gentle breeze moves the dry leaves around it, creating a faint, whispering sound, giving the impression that the city still speaks to those willing to listen. You step forward and arrive at a wider area, formerly the city square. Cracked concrete shows traces of past market tents and chalk drawings made by children playing. At the edge of the square, several park benches remain intact, though their paint has faded and their metal frames begin to rust. You sit on one briefly, letting your eyes wander around, observing how the evening light filters through building gaps, casting long shadows that shift slowly. The feeling is a mixture of solitude and connection to the past, as if you can sense the life that once existed here without human presence. As you leave the square and continue down the next street, your awareness of the vanished city deepens. Every building, sidewalk, kiosk, and statue serves as a silent witness to the past, now frozen. You realize that your journey is not merely a traversal of physical spaces, but an unveiling of layers of memory left behind in architecture and subtle atmospheres, inviting anyone present to feel the traces of life that once dominated this city. You walk further into an area now appearing darker as tall trees surrounding you begin to block sunlight. The path you follow was once the access to apartment buildings, now in ruins and overgrown with wild plants. You pay attention to each step because the ground is uneven, scattered with broken concrete and brick fragments fallen from collapsed buildings. The scent of damp earth mingles with the smell of old wood and metal, creating the sensation that the city holds traces of every human activity that once occurred here. You feel a subtle calm, not empty silence, but a quietness filled with memories lingering in the structures and streets. On the left side of the path, remnants of a metal staircase connecting lower and upper floors of an apartment building are visible. The stairs are rusted, yet still stand, though some steps are missing. You imagine children running up these stairs to their homes, laughter and conversation echoing through the corridors. Now only the old metal remains, a silent witness to the lives that once existed. The surrounding stillness is so dense that every step you take becomes part of the story of a city that never truly slept. You walk through a narrow corridor between two apartment buildings whose facades are mostly destroyed. Broken windows reveal shadows of wild grass growing floor by floor, as if the city is asserting its presence in a different way. Dust clings to the walls, moving slowly as the wind passes through the corridor, creating the impression that the city itself breathes quietly. You touch one wall, feeling the rough, cracked surface as though it holds every pressure that once existed in the past. In a small, open yard, you find the remains of a playground with swings hanging but unmoving, and a seesaw that is fragile. You imagine the sound of children running back and forth, playing with joy and laughter filling the air. Now the space is silent. Only the wind and the movement of leaves remind you of life that once flowed here. You feel that every fragment of this city, no matter how small, holds memories waiting to be discovered by a patient visitor. As you leave the apartment area and step onto a wider street, the sense of combined quiet and the presence of the past grows stronger. The city is not just an empty space, but a container of memories embedded in every building, street, and tree. You realize that each step brings you closer to understanding the life that once filled this city, while also reminding you that time has transformed everything into a silence full of meaning and history. As you step toward the wider city center, you come upon the main street that was once busy with vehicles and pedestrians. Now covered with wild grass and cracks in the asphalt. The previously smooth road now has small depressions that collect rainwater, forming puddles reflecting the shadows of trees and remnants of surrounding buildings. The air feels more open and cool, carrying the damp scent of old concrete and oxidized metal. Each step you take produces a soft sound from gravel and grass, as though becoming part of the silent symphony of a city left behind. On the left side of the street stands an administrative building with a cracked facade and broken windows. The main door has fallen from its hinges and lies on the ground, while the nameplate indicating its function is almost unreadable. You imagine employees entering this building each morning, the sound of footsteps and doors closing behind them, now remaining only as memories embedded in the walls and floors. Even the remaining furniture casts faint shadows of the past that feel tangible. Not far from the administrative building lies a small city park that may once have been full of flowers and decorative statues. Now, wild plants dominate, turning the area into uncontrolled green space. You notice remnants of pathways partially covered by soil and grass, and benches that are broken and moss-covered. The park that was once lively is now silent, inhabited only by the sounds of wild birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. You sense that this space holds stories of residents. Children's laughter, conversations, and footsteps now turned into fading echoes. At the end of the main street, you see the city clock tower standing tall despite cracks in its walls, and its hands stopped precisely at the time of the disaster. The tower symbolizes the abandoned city, a reminder that time stopped here for much of its life, yet continues in nature and remaining structures. You gaze at the tower, sensing a connection between the physical structure and the lingering memories, as if it holds the entire history of the lost city. Standing in the middle of the main street, a cold wind brushes your face, bringing a profound sense of silence. The city is not merely ruins and old buildings, but a vessel for layers of memory that endured despite the absence of humans. you realize that each step taken every passing second strengthens your connection to the history left in every corner of this city. You continue walking, aware that Pripyat is not only a vanished city, but also a place where human memory remains. Alive among the ruins, and nature slowly reclaiming its space. You step away from the main street down a narrow alley partially covered by concrete rubble and fallen tree trunks. The air here feels heavier, as if absorbing every step and sound you make. You notice remnants of cracked, moss-covered sidewalks and the walls of buildings that may have once been homes or small. Shops now leaving only faint shadows of shapes and lines. Light entering through narrow gaps creates slow-moving shadow patterns across the broken surfaces, seemingly guiding your steps deeper into this forgotten part of the city. On the right side of the alley stands a two-story house with a partially collapsed roof. The windows are shattered, allowing wind and light to penetrate the empty interior. As you step closer, you can see overturned furniture, open cabinets, and household items left behind. Though empty, the house retains an aura of past life, the warmth of families who once lived here, the smell of cooking children. Laughter and light conversations, now only echoes. You sense how every corner carries a different story, forming layers of memory that cling to the walls and concrete floors. The alley slopes downward until you reach a small square surrounded by low buildings. Trees grow uncontrollably in the center, forming a canopy that blocks sunlight and creates a shaded atmosphere. You hear the rustling of leaves and birds that have endured here, producing a natural harmony contrasting with the silence of the city. At several points, you notice remnants of children. Toys scattered across the ground, their colors faded, yet their shapes still narrate past activity filled with life. You walk around the square, observing every detail, the cracks in walls, traces of moss, faded paint, and small scattered debris. All of these elements merge, forming a visual map of life that once existed in Pripyat. You realize that even though the city has been abandoned, every object and every space carries the energy of the past that can still be felt. You touch the cold surfaces of the walls, feeling the rough texture imbued with traces of time. As you leave the alley and return to the wider street, a sense of melancholy envelops you. This lost city is not merely empty buildings and ruins, but an invisible archive of human history. Every final step you take strengthens the awareness that Pripyat remains alive through the memories embedded in every corner, holding stories, emotions, and traces of life that have never truly disappeared. You walk slowly away from the last square, traversing streets now overgrown with trees and wild grass that grows unchecked. Each step produces gentle sounds from leaves and shifting debris, as if the city is speaking in a language only heard by those patient enough to listen. The air feels cool yet warm, reminding you of the mixture of old and new time that clings to every surface. You watch long shadows slowly change with the direction of sunlight, connecting past and present in a nearly silent dance. Along the streets, you gaze at empty buildings that once bustled with activity, now merely silent frameworks. Broken windows reflect light in strange ways, as if holding on to memories that once passed through them. You can imagine the footsteps of children who once played, laughter echoing, and adults orchestrating daily life. Now there is only a gentle echo, almost like the city's soft sigh, waiting to be remembered. You feel that each building, each ruin, and even every tree breaking through the pavement carries its own story that requires no words to convey. You close your eyes briefly and let the atmosphere envelop you. This lost city remains alive through the memories left behind, the energy lingering in dust and concrete, and the rhythm of nature slowly covering human traces. In the distance, the sky fades into twilight, the warm yet soft light wrapping the city in a rare sense of peace. All these elements combine to create an end to the journey, not about discovery, but acceptance, about realizing that the city has become part of time itself. As you step out of Pripyat, your steps feel light, yet filled with awareness of the past that continues to influence this space. You leave the streets and empty buildings with the sense that the stories once alive here still whisper through every corner of the city. The wind brushing against your face carries the scent of earth and old wood, a reminder that life is never truly gone, but only transformed into memory. You take one last look around and feel a faint yet profound peace. This city that vanished twice is no longer frightening or hollow, but has become a melancholic story, moving slowly within every particle of dust, every shadow and beam of light, waiting to be discovered by those willing to approach it with calmness and respect. You walk away, leaving Pripyat, yet carrying a small piece of its history within you, a reminder that time and memory can coexist in beautiful silence.